A wild animal is trapped. Maybe it's a deer caught in fencing, a bird tangled in fishing line, a seal with plastic wrapped around its neck. Then a human appears. And from the animal's perspective, this should make everything worse. You're already trapped, already stressed, already unable to escape, and now the most unpredictable large animal on the planet is walking directly toward you carrying tools. So you struggle. You bite. You kick. You do everything your nervous system has spent millions of years learning to do when something dangerous gets close. But then something strange happens. The human doesn't attack you. They cut the rope. They remove the hook. They open the trap. And suddenly, you're free. Now here's the question. If that animal sees the same person tomorrow, does it know? Does it actually recognize the human who saved its life? And if it does, what exactly does it remember? The face? The smell? The experience? Does it understand that the human was trying to help? Or does it simply remember that individual was around when something good happened? And when rescued animals return to their rescuers months or even years later, are we actually looking at gratitude? Or are humans doing what humans do best and turning animal behavior into a story about ourselves? The answer is complicated. And honestly, that makes it much more interesting. Because before an animal can remember that you saved it, it has to solve a surprisingly difficult problem. It has to recognize you. Not human. You. And some animals are ridiculously good at this. Crows are probably the most famous example. Researchers at the University of Washington captured wild crows while wearing specific masks. The birds were banded and released. Later, researchers walked through the same area wearing those faces again. The crows reacted immediately. They scolded them, followed them, warned other crows. And years later, they were still doing it. Even more remarkably, birds that had never personally been captured began responding to the threatening face too. The information had spread socially. Basically, crows had created a neighborhood watch list and somehow added a human face to it. But this tells us something important. A crow doesn't simply classify every person as human. It can build a file on an individual. This one is dangerous. That one isn't. And if animals can remember humans who harmed them, there is no obvious reason the same memory system couldn't work in the opposite direction. Dogs make this even clearer. Dogs don't just recognize our faces. They use our voices, smell, body language, movement, and probably combinations of signals we're barely aware we're producing. To your dog, you aren't one recognizable thing. You're an entire sensory package. And smell may be especially important. Humans are visually obsessed, so we tend to assume recognition means looking at someone's face and thinking, "Oh, that's Sarah." A dog may be doing something completely different. Your skin oils, your sweat, your clothes, the microorganisms living on your body, the products you use. Together, they create an odor signature distinctive enough that a dog's nose can identify you under conditions where its eyes might not. So when we ask whether an animal remembers its rescuer, we may already be asking the question incorrectly. It might not remember what you look like. It may remember what you smell like, how you sound, how you move, or all of those things together. Elephants take this to another level. Elephants live in complicated social worlds where memory is extremely valuable. They travel over enormous areas. They maintain relationships. They remember locations of water and food. And research has shown that they can discriminate between different categories of humans using cues such as voice and smell. That ability makes sense when you think about the environment they evolved in. Not every human represents the same level of danger. If one group regularly threatens you and another doesn't, treating both identically wastes information. The better strategy is, remember the difference. And that brings us to rescue. Suppose an elephant becomes trapped in mud. Humans arrive. At first, the elephant's nervous system doesn't know what they're doing. All it knows is that humans are approaching while escape is impossible. That's terrifying. Then the pattern changes. The humans aren't striking. They're pulling away mud, moving ropes, creating space. Eventually, the elephant gets out. What did its brain actually learn? This is where we have to be careful. Because saying, "The elephant understood that those people compassionately intended to save its life," is a much bigger claim than saying, "The elephant learned those humans were associated with escape." Those are not the same thing. Understanding intent requires more than memory. It requires recognizing that another individual has a goal, and that their actions are being performed to achieve that goal. Humans do this constantly. If someone accidentally bumps into you, you react differently than if they deliberately shove you. Same physical event, different intention. Can animals make that distinction? At least some of them appear capable of surprisingly sophisticated versions of it. Experiments with dogs have tested situations where a human fails to give them food because they are unable to, versus situations where the human appears unwilling. Dogs don't always respond identically. They can use human behavior to extract information about what the person is trying to do. Great apes show even stronger abilities. Chimpanzees can distinguish between someone who cannot perform an action and someone who simply refuses. Which means the building blocks required to understand helping behavior exist in at least some species. But does a trapped whale understand, "That diver is cutting this rope because he wants me to survive"? We don't know. And anyone claiming we do is going further than the evidence allows. The animal doesn't need a human concept of rescue to understand something important is happening. It can notice that the human's actions are changing its situation. And sometimes, its behavior appears to change during the rescue itself. Wildlife rescuers occasionally describe animals that begin by fighting violently, then become noticeably calmer as humans work. That doesn't necessarily mean the animal suddenly understands everything. Stress can change. Exhaustion matters. Habituation matters. But there is another possibility. The animal may be updating its prediction. Human approaching me. Expected result, danger. Human touches trap instead. No attack. Pressure decreases. Human continues. Again, no attack. At some point, the brain has new information. Whatever this creature is doing, it isn't following the normal predator script. And once that experience ends with freedom, the memory can become extremely powerful. Which brings us to the part humans really want to believe. Gratitude. We've all seen those videos. An animal is released. Then, instead of immediately disappearing, it turns around, looks at the rescuer, maybe approaches, maybe touches them. And everyone in the comments reaches the same conclusion. It came back to say thank you. Maybe. But science has to be more annoying than the comment section. Because there are several explanations for exactly the same behavior. The animal may be curious. It may still be processing an intense experience. It may have become temporarily accustomed to the rescuer's presence. A social species may initiate contact because physical contact is already part of how it regulates stress. Or, it may genuinely be experiencing something that overlaps with what humans call gratitude. The problem isn't that gratitude in animals is impossible. The problem is proving it. Gratitude is an internal emotional state. Behavior is what we can observe. A whale swimming back toward a diver is observable. "Thank you for saving me" is our interpretation. And those two things should never automatically be treated as the same. But familiarity? That is much easier to demonstrate. Animals absolutely can change their behavior toward specific individuals based on previous interactions. And in highly social animals, those relationships can become surprisingly complicated. Think about what friendship is at its simplest level. I remember you. Past interactions with you were positive. I predict future interactions will probably be positive too. That's basically a biological credit score. And plenty of animals keep one. Primates remember who cooperated with them. Crows remember threatening humans. Dogs form long-term attachment relationships. Elephants maintain social memories across long periods. Dolphins can recognize the signature whistles of individuals they haven't encountered for years. So whether an animal recognizes its rescuer depends enormously on which animal we're talking about. A socially complex, long-lived animal with strong individual recognition has much more cognitive machinery available for maintaining that memory. An elephant, a chimpanzee, a dolphin, a crow, a dog. These animals live in worlds where remembering individuals matters. Compare that with an animal whose life depends much less on long-term social relationships. The rescue may still affect its behavior. It may learn that humans in a particular location aren't dangerous. But expecting it to maintain a detailed autobiographical memory of one specific rescuer years later is a much bigger stretch. And this is where people make a mistake. We talk about animals as though that's one brain. It isn't. A crow and a lizard are both animals in the same way that a bicycle and a spacecraft are both machines. Technically correct. Not especially useful. Different species evolved to solve completely different problems. And memory reflects those problems. Which brings us to the final question. How long could an animal remember someone who saved it? Potentially, a very long time. But again, species matters. Crows have demonstrated recognition of threatening human faces years after the original interaction. Elephants are famous for maintaining long-term social information. Great apes can recognize familiar individuals after long separations. Dogs can retain memories associated with people even after substantial time apart. And dolphins may be among the champions. Research on bottlenose dolphins found that they could recognize the signature whistles of former companions after separations lasting more than 20 years. 20 years. For an animal living a few decades, that's an enormous portion of its life. Now, that doesn't prove a dolphin will remember a human rescuer for 20 years. That's an important distinction. What it proves is that the dolphin brain is capable of storing individual social identities for extraordinarily long periods. If a rescue experience is intense enough, and the individual becomes important enough, long-term recognition is biologically plausible. And intense experiences are exactly the kinds of things brains tend to remember. Fear strengthens memory. Stress strengthens certain forms of learning. Relief can become associated with whatever immediately preceded it. A rescue combines all three: danger, extreme stress, then sudden release. If there were ever an interaction worth remembering, that's a pretty good candidate. So, do animals recognize humans who saved them? For some species, almost certainly yes. They can recognize individuals. They can remember previous interactions. And they can change their future behavior based on what happened before. Do they understand the human's intention? Some socially intelligent species appear capable of distinguishing helpful behavior from harmful or unwilling behavior. But we cannot assume every rescued animal understands the human concept of being saved. Is it gratitude? Possibly in some cases. But familiarity, learned trust, relief, and positive association are much easier to demonstrate scientifically. Does species matter? Enormously. An elephant, crow, dolphin, chimpanzee, or dog is operating with a very different social memory system from many less social animals. And how long can the memory last? Days in some cases, years in others. Potentially decades in species built for extraordinary long-term social recognition. And maybe that's more interesting than the simple version anyway. The animal doesn't need to think, "You saved my life, and I am eternally grateful." Maybe it remembers something much simpler. Your face, your voice, your smell, the moment the pain stopped, the moment the trap opened, the moment something it was terrified of turned out not to be dangerous. And then years later, it encounters you again. For you, it's an animal you once helped. But somewhere inside that animal's brain, a very old file opens. And somehow, you're still in it.